Hello, beautiful friends. I am Laurel Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, welcoming you to this episode of Sleepy Bedtime Blessings, a podcast designed to help you rest, relax, and fall asleep, and also that is here to help you deepen in your connection with your beautiful team of angels who love you so. If we're meeting for the first time, I am an angelic practitioner, a spiritual teacher, and an encourager of souls. And I do this through one-on-one angel sessions, soul mentoring, and a variety of classes and circles, and you can learn more about my offerings in the morning when you wake up at illuminatingsouls.com. There are a variety of ways that we can connect. I have a Facebook page and a mailing list. I'm pretty easy to find. But for now, I am here to help you sleep. So I invite you to cozy on up, snuggle on in, and fluff your pillows just so. And allow yourself to begin to relax and let go of whatever came before this moment. Because it's your time now to rest. And resting is an important part of our self-care. It is a time when we replenish our bodies, restore, and it is also a time for our consciousness to have an opportunity to let go and in some ways rewire. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of going to sleep contemplating something that you couldn't quite figure out. And by the time you woke up in the morning, somehow the path had been cleared for you. I really like to contemplate our consciousness as resilient. And we quite often will receive an infusion of clarity and of guidance, especially while we're sleeping. As many of you know, I studied spiritual psychology at the University of Santa Monica, and I learned so many skills there. One of them that they teach is what's called a bedtime intention. The theory behind this is that expanse of time just before we go to sleep and when we finally drift off is a powerful time to say our prayers and intentions. So for instance, if there's something that you are challenged by, maybe you don't have the answer you need, or you've been trying to clear it on your own and it's not clearing, that you can ask the angels and God for help in clearing the circumstance or clearing out any fear or confusion. Or you can ask them to help you gain clarity or inspiration. And I have found over the years that working with bedtime intentions is such a wonderful way to work with the angels and the divine. I often will ask them for assistance in what kinds of classes to offer next. If there's a line of energy that I'm having trouble resolving on my own, I might ask them for help in clearing and healing it. So tonight, as you get ready to drift off, I want you to know that your bedtime intentions are welcome here. That this is your invitation to let your angels and God know how they can support you. And I know you've heard me share this before, but you have permission to ask for help. You don't have to be in the throes of suffering to ask for help. My guides love to say that divine love and support is more plentiful than the sun. And so just as we would never think that we couldn't use up sun because other people needed it more, neither should we hold off asking for divine support either. And I also say this knowing the beauty of your soul, and I know that you pray and ask for the well-being of others too. We don't have to teach you how to pray for other people. You do it all the time. But so many of us who are light bearers, and if you're listening, I am sure you are one, we are really good at giving, and sometimes we're not so good at receiving. So this is a sweet and simple, kind of fun way to receive. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to call in the angels. And while I do, you breathe. Breathing's important. And we're going to let the angels come in. And then they're going to invite in your bedtime intentions for this evening. So beautiful angels on high, I ask that you join us here. And angels, I ask that you infuse this broadcast with waves and waves of divine love, so that each and every beloved listening to this broadcast feels and senses the love you are streaming to them. And angels, we also ask that you bring in waves of healing, recognizing that we don't always need to know what's up for healing, but God knows. So we ask for the blessings of healing into the depth and breadth of our beingness across time and space, placing a wave of grace and goodness upon every moment of our lives. And angels, we ask for an infusion of lightness of spirit and sparks of inspiration that help us awaken to the brightness of our spirit. So, dear ones, take a deep breath in and release. And come into your heart. And we invite you to share a bedtime intention with the angels and God. How can they support you as you sleep tonight? Is there something they can do to help bring you clarity or healing or guidance? And just take a breath in and just gently share with them in consciousness. And then take a breath and release that. And here's the invitation. The invitation is for you to receive divine support. And just notice, how does it feel to open to divine support? The thing to know, whether it's about a bedtime intention or a prayer or law of attraction, that it's not like making 3 wishes upon a genie in a bottle. it's not about instant manifestation. I wish I had a pony, and then you wake up and the next morning there's a pony on your doorstep. But when we say our prayers, our intentions, when we open to receive, it gives the angels and the divine permission to open portals of potential for us. And things begin to shift. And so what I find is, in the days that follow setting an intention or a prayer, I just make space to observe gently. It doesn't have to be a big, profound sign, but I just notice what's floating through my consciousness. I take note of the things that show up and inspire me. And sometimes I wake up and I feel that an internal shift has taken place, which is always wonderful, because sometimes just a shift in consciousness of a few degrees provides profound relief and resiliency. So take a breath in and let go. And know that in this moment your angels are with you. Your angels have loved you since before you were born. They know the very truth of you. There is nothing you need to hide nor ever could hide from them. They understand you, and they have profound understanding and compassion for you. And they also recognize your ability to grow and transform. So when you ask for assistance in shifting a pattern in consciousness, or healing the way you're experiencing an aspect of your life, they will do their best to support you. There's a saying that we use at the University of Santa Monica, and it says, how you relate to the issue is the issue. And I'm sure you have heard some variation of that before. But it really speaks to the impact of how we hold for things in consciousness. We've all had the experience where we have been in a fight with someone in our consciousness, yes. And we start having these one-way arguments, and we get more angry and more angry. And our inner consciousness is stoking the fire of our rage. Versus, if we can make space to come into our consciousness to calm the rage, to shift how we're holding something in consciousness, it can make a huge difference. So I always try to be mindful of the stories I'm running within my consciousness. It's not always easy, and I promise you I am not perfect at it. But I do my best to string together the narrative of my experiences in a way that supports me. One of the stories I often refer to is this one. Back in 2013, my husband and I were in the midst of a perfectly awful year. It was one of those hard years. And I won't go into the details of what was happening, but it was just one of those years where challenge after challenge after challenge happened. And there was this one particular circumstance that landed on all of my unresolved material. because I'm sure you've got some of that too, right? All of my fear was up. And every time I would tell the story of this circumstance, it would be disempowering. I would tell people about how awful it was and how difficult it was and how challenging it felt. And probably when I had told this story a few too many times, I felt the angels come to me. And they said this. They said, "You're going to want to be careful about how you tell this story because you're going to get to be right." And I thought, uh-oh, because I don't like the version of the story I'm living right now. I don't want to be any more right about this. So they said, "Here's how you could tell the story." And they labeled some of the details. They said, this is happening and all my stuff is up around it. So I could acknowledge that I have stuff, unresolved stuff around it. But then they said, "But then you pivot, and this is the pivot. But here's what I know. God always takes care of me, and things always have a way of working out for me." And as they said that, I could feel into the truth of that. Because there have been so many times in my life that was my truth. Now, I know not everyone has experienced a life filled with as much grace as I have, but I'm hopeful that you can find some pearls of grace on your path when God has shown up for you. And that's the pivot. It's a vibrational pivot. So here is what I know, that God takes care of me and things have a way of working out. It was just a subtle shift in consciousness, but it made space. It made space for me to let go of the part of me that was sure these experiences would end in a bigger disaster. Because at the time, I was exhausted and I was overwhelmed. And I didn't really have it within my grasp to be my own cheerleader. I mean, we all have those moments, right, where life feels overwhelming. We wonder how we are going to possibly find our way out of the storm. And so that subtle shift taught me so much, because within a few months, my husband and I experienced a few really profound miracles around what we were navigating, which will be a story for another day. But I always remember that. Be careful of how you tell the story, because you're going to get to be right. It's like, wait a second. So I'm mindful of how I tell my stories now. And it's okay if you're feeling disappointed about something or overwhelmed. In sharing this wisdom with you, we are not asking you to suppress that. But remember, in the telling of your story and the embracing of your circumstances, be sure to speak of the light as well. Be sure to speak of the resiliency that is hardwired into your spirit. Be sure to speak of the miracles that are sure to meet you on this path at some point. Be sure to speak of the brighter tomorrows that are singing you forth in life. It's a really powerful way to get recentered when life feels unpredictable. And it's okay, you get to have bad days and you get to have good ones too. We all walk through all of it, the shadow and the light, right? The night and the dark and every other version of polarity in between. What I have found is using some of these tools like the Bedtime Intentions and the pivot as I am sharing my stories, especially my sad stories. It helps me to shift consciousness so that my inner world becomes a reflection of what I seek to embody in my outer experience as well. So take a deep breath in and release. And know that you've got this. You got this. You're a divine, wise, beautiful being of light. You are a big, beautiful soul. And there is a place for you in this world. That you are blossoming open into beautiful expressions of your own light. And even if you're going through the hard stuff right now, that's just your right now. We all get to have brighter tomorrows, God willing. We have lots of them ahead of us. That the sun is going to rise in the morning and maybe there'll be a beautiful sunrise or you'll get to hear birds chirping. That God and the angels will send you signs of magic that will help you remember the beauty that is here for you. The angels and I are so deeply grateful for you, truly. I am honored to get to spend this time with you. This is a precious time of night or day whenever you're listening. The love is profound here for you. I don't know if you can feel it. I know that we don't all feel energy in the same way. But I am feeling it flowing for you now. Just take another breath in and let it out. You are a gift from on high. Miracles and magic are being woven together for you and will arrive in ways you cannot even yet imagine. Do not step into your sorrows too soon. So many of the things that you worry about will not come to pass. You are a bringer of light. You are a keeper of goodness. Your angels and God are here to support you. So breathe in the love and breathe out anything that feels like it's not love. Giving yourself permission to connect with your divine, magical self while you sleep so that you have sweet dreams. And when it is time for you to awaken, that you will awaken feeling refreshed and inspired. And while you rest, I am asking the angels to sprinkle grace and magic and light upon your path. We will send light ahead of whatever you have on your agenda tomorrow. Waves of light will precede you wherever you go. But for now, you rest, letting your body let go and restore and recharge. And while you do, the angels will watch over you. And I'm going to tell you a story. So if you happen to listen to episode 33, I promised you we were going to get back to the story of A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett. The last time I read from this book, it was in episode 18 back in January. I loved this book growing up, and there are aspects of this book that are very sad. So I'm skipping over this. We're going to fast forward to the parts of the book that I think are a bit more enchanting. And I'm hoping you're going to sleep through this anyways. So don't feel as if you have to rely upon this podcast as you might an audiobook. If you really want to hear the whole story, there's probably some amazing audiobooks out there for you. But let me give you a little synopsis of where we are in the story. So Sarah Crewe is a little girl. Her father was Captain Crewe, and he was very dashing and charming and rather young and wealthy. And I believe he was in the military, right? If he's a captain, he would be in the military in India. So this was in the early 1900s, in the time of imperialism, where Great Britain was ruling India, and there were a great many people from the UK who lived in India. So her father was there. And as was the custom then, the children would be sent away to boarding school in London. So Sarah has been at Miss Minchin's school for young women for a while. And Miss Minchin is not a kind lady. She sucks up to the parents, but she's kind of bitter and has hard edges to her. So when Sarah first came to her seminary, her father was very wealthy and spoiled her, even though Sarah was not the kind of child to be spoiled. Sarah has always been profoundly kind and compassionate and generous. She doesn't understand why she would have privileges and other children didn't. But Miss Minchin always resented the way that Captain Crewe spoiled Sarah. And sadly, Captain Crewe went into business with a friend of his on a gold mine. And the gold mine failed, and he lost all his money. And then he got very sick and tragically dies. When his solicitors come to tell Miss Minchin that Captain Crewe has passed away and that Sarah is now a penniless orphan, they have one act of kindness in that they say to Miss Minchin, "You cannot throw this child out onto the street. It will look bad for you." And Miss Minchin is horrified because now she has to take care of Sarah. And remember, back in the early 1900s, was a really hard time to be penniless. It's always a hard time to be penniless, but especially back then, it was the workhouses and, children would be put to work, and there were not a lot of societal protections for the vulnerable. So Miss Minchin relegates Sarah to a servant and has her go live upstairs in the attic next to the scullery maid, Becky, who is one of Sarah's friends. And Sarah, of course, is devastated by all of this. She continues to live in her imagination as she always has. She tells stories. She helps teach the younger children. She's always sent out on errands. And during some of her errands, she has come to grow enchanted by a family that she sees quite often, that she has dubbed the large family because they have so many children. She's given all the children their own names, and she muses about what their life would be like. She has also made friends with a sparrow that she sees out her window. And also in typical Sarah fashion, she has made friends with a rat who lives in her room with her, who she calls Melchizedek. The house next door to Sarah has been vacant for some time. But recently, there has been a lot of movement around this house. and it's clear that someone has moved in. And coincidentally enough, the father of the large family appears to be a solicitor of sorts for whoever is moving into the house next door. What she has discerned at this point, it seems as if the gentleman who is moving next door is profoundly sick, and also that the household has a lot of the kinds of furniture and artwork that Sarah remembered from India. So that's where we're at so far in the story. So this is chapter 11, and it's entitled Ram Dass. And we're not talking about the famous Ram Dass that you and I might know about, but Ram Dass is the name of the person who's moving next door. Ram Dass is his servant from India. So you're caught up. And maybe you're asleep already, but we're going to keep going. There were fine sunsets, even in the square sometimes. One could only see parts of them, however, between the chimneys and over the roofs. From the kitchen windows one could not see them at all, and could only guess that they were going on because the bricks looked warm and the air rosy or yellow for a while. Or perhaps one saw a blazing glow strike a particular pane of glass somewhere. There was, however, one place from which one could see all the splendor of them. The piles of red or gold clouds in the west, or the purple ones edged with dazzling brightness, or the little fleecy floating ones tinged with rose color and looking like flights of pink doves scurrying across the blue in a great hurry if there was a wind. The place where one could see all of this and seem at the same time to breathe a purer air was, of course, the attic window. When the square suddenly seemed to begin to glow in an enchanted way and look wonderful in spite of its sooty trees and railings, Sarah knew something was going on in the sky. And when it was at all possible to leave the kitchen without being missed or called back, she invariably stole away and crept up the flight of stairs and, climbing on the old table, got her head and body as far out of the window as possible. When she had accomplished this, she always drew a long breath and looked all around her. It used to seem as if she had all the sky in the world to herself. No one else ever looked out of the other attics. Generally, the skylights were closed, but even if they were propped open to admit air, no one seemed to come near them. And there Sarah would stand, sometimes turning her face upward to the blue, which seemed so friendly and near, just like a lovely vaulted ceiling, sometimes watching the west and all the wonderful things that happened there, the clouds melting or drifting or waiting softly to be changed pink or crimson, or snow white or purple, or pale dove gray. Sometimes they made islands or great mountains enclosing lakes of deep turquoise blue, or liquid amber, or green. Sometimes dark headlands jutted into strange lost seas. Sometimes slender strips of wonderful lands joined other wonderful lands together. There were places where it seemed that one could run or climb or stand and wait to see what next was coming, until perhaps as it all melted one could float away. At least it seemed so to Sarah, and nothing had ever been quite so beautiful to her as the things she saw as she stood on the table, her body half out of the skylight, the sparrows twittering with sunset softness on the slates. The sparrows always seemed to her to twitter with a sort of subdued softness, just when these marvels were going on. There was such a sunset as this a few days after the Indian gentleman was brought to his new home. And as it fortunately happened, that afternoon's work was done in the kitchen, and nobody had ordered her to go anywhere or perform any task. Sarah found it easier than usual to slip away and go upstairs. She mounted her table and stood looking out. It was a wonderful moment. There were floods of molten gold covering the west, as if a glorious tide was sweeping over the world. A deep, rich yellow light filled the air. The birds flying across the tops of the houses showed quite black against it. "It's a splendid one," said Sarah softly to herself. "It makes me feel almost afraid, as if something strange was going to happen. The splendid ones always made me feel like that." She suddenly turned her head because she heard a sound a few yards away from her. It was an odd sound, like a queer little squeaky chattering. It came from the window of the next attic. Someone had come to look at the sunset as she had. There was a head and a part of a body emerging from the skylight. But it was not the head or body of a little girl or housemaid. It was the picturesque, white-swathed form and dark-faced, gleaming-eyed, white-turbaned head of a native Indian manservant, a Lascar, Sarah said to herself quickly, and the sound she had heard came from a small monkey he held in his arms as if he were fond of it, and which was snuggling and chattering against his breast. As Sarah looked towards him, he looked toward her. The first thing she thought was that his dark face looked sorrowful and homesick. She felt absolutely sure he had come up to look at the sun because he had seen it so seldom in England that he longed for a sight of it. She looked at him interestedly for a second, and then smiled across the slates. She had learned to know how comforting a smile, even from a stranger, may be. Hers was evidently a pleasure to him. His whole expression altered, and he showed such gleaming white teeth as he smiled back that it was as if a light had been illuminated in his dusky face. The friendly look in Sarah's eyes was always very effective when people felt tired or dull. It was perhaps in making his salute to her that he loosened his hold on the monkey. He was an impish monkey and always ready for adventure, and it is probable that the sight of a little girl excited him. He suddenly broke loose, jumped onto the slates, ran across them chattering, and actually leaped onto Sarah's shoulders, and from there down into her attic room. It made her laugh and delighted her, but she knew he must be restored to his master, if the Lascar was his master, and she wondered how this was to be done. Would he let her catch him? Or would he be naughty and refuse to be caught, and perhaps get away and run off over the roofs and be lost? Well, that would not do at all. Perhaps he belonged to the Indian gentleman, and the poor man was fond of him. She turned to the Lascar, feeling glad that she remembered still some of the Hindustani she had learned when she lived with her father. She could make the man understand. She spoke to him in the language he knew. "Will he let me catch him?" she asked. She thought she had never seen more surprise and delight than the dark face expressed when she spoke in the familiar tongue. The truth was that the poor fellow felt as if his gods had intervened, and the kind little voice came from heaven itself. At once Sarah saw that he had been accustomed to European children. He poured forth a flood of respectful thanks. He was the servant of Missy Sahib. The monkey was a good monkey and would not bite, but unfortunately he was difficult to catch. He would flee from one spot to another like the lightning. He was disobedient, though not evil. Ram Das knew him as if he were his child, and Ram Das he would sometimes obey, but not always. If Missy Sahib would permit Ram Das, he himself could cross the roof to her room, enter the windows, and regain the unworthy little animal. But he was evidently afraid Sarah might think he was taking a great liberty, and perhaps would not let him come. But Sarah gave him leave at once. "Can you get across?" she inquired. "In a moment," he answered her. "Then come," she said. He is flying from side to side of the room as if he was frightened. Ram Das slipped through his attic window and crossed to hers as steadily and lightly as if he had walked on roofs all of his life. He slipped through the skylight and dropped upon his feet without a sound. Then he turned to Sarah and salaamed again. The monkey saw him and uttered a little scream. Ram Das hastily took the precaution of shutting the skylight, and then went in chase of him. It was not a very long chase. The monkey prolonged it a few minutes, evidently for the mere fun of it. But presently he sprang chattering onto Ram Das's shoulder, and sat there chattering and clinging to his neck with a weird little skinny arm. Ram Das thanked Sarah profoundly. She had seen that his quick native eyes had taken in at a glance all of the bare shabbiness of the room. But he spoke to her as if he were speaking to the little daughter of a Raja, and pretended that he observed nothing. He did not presume to remain more than a few moments after he had caught the monkey, and those moments were given to further deep gratitude to her in return for her indulgence. This little evil one, he said, stroking the monkey, was in truth not so evil as he seemed, and his master, who was ill, was sometimes amused by him. He would have been made sad if his favorite had run away and been lost. Then he salaamed once more and got through the skylight and across the slates again, with as much agility as the monkey himself had displayed. When he had gone, Sarah stood in the middle of her attic and thought of many things his face and his manner had brought back to her. The sight of his native costume and the profound reverence of his manner stirred all her past memories. It seemed a strange thing to remember that she, the drudge, whom the cook had said insulting things to an hour ago, had only a few years ago been surrounded by people who all treated her as Ram Das had treated her, who salaamed when she went by, whose foreheads almost touched the ground when she spoke to them. It was like a sort of dream. It was all over, and it could never come back. It certainly seemed that there was no way in which any change could take place. She knew what Miss Minchin intended that her future should be. So long as she was too young to be used as a regular teacher, she would be used as an errand girl and servant, and yet expected to remember what she had learned and in some mysterious way to learn more. The greater number of her evenings she was supposed to spend at study, and at various indefinite intervals she was examined and knew she would have been severely admonished if she had not advanced as was expected of her. The truth, indeed, was that Miss Minchin knew that she was too anxious to learn to require teachers. Give her books and she would devour them, and end by knowing them by heart. She might be trusted to be equal to teaching a good deal in the course of a few years. This was what would happen. When she was older, she would be expected to drudge in the schoolroom, as she drudged now in various parts of the house. They would be obliged to give her more respectable clothes, but they would be sure to be plain and ugly, and to make her look somehow like a servant. That was all there seemed to be to look forward to, and Sarah stood quite still for several minutes and thought it over. Then a thought came back to her which made the color rise in her cheek and a spark light itself into her eyes. She straightened her thin little body and lifted her head. Whatever comes, she said, cannot alter one thing. If I am a princess in rags and tatters, I can be a princess inside. It would be easy to be a princess if I were dressed in cloth of gold, but it is a great deal more of a triumph to be one all the time when no one knows it. This was not a new thought, but quite an old one by this time. It had consoled her through many a bitter day, and she had gone about the house with an expression in her face which Miss Minchin could not understand, and which was a source of great annoyance to her, as it seemed as if the child were mentally living a life which held her above the rest of the world. It was as if she scarcely heard the rude and acid things said to her, or if she heard them, she did not care for them at all. Sometimes when she was in the midst of some harsh, domineering speech, Miss Minchin would find the still, unchildish eyes fixed upon her with something like a proud smile in them. At such times she did not know that Sarah was saying to herself, "You don't know that you are saying these things to a princess, and that if I chose I could wave my hand and order you to execution. I only spare you because I am a princess and you are a poor, stupid, unkind, vulgar old thing and don't know any better." This used to interest and amuse her more than anything else, and queer and fanciful as it was, she found comfort in it, and it was a good thing for her. While the thought held possession of her, she could not be made rude and malicious by the rudeness and malice of those about her. A princess must be polite, she said to herself. And so when the servants, taking their tone from their mistress, were insolent and ordered her about, she would hold her head erect and reply to them with a quaint civility which often made them stare at her. "She's got more airs and graces than if she come from Buckingham Palace, that young one," said the cook, chuckling a little sometimes. "I lose my temper with her often enough. But I will say she never forgets her manners. If you please, cook. Will you be so kind, cook? I beg your pardon, cook. May I trouble you, cook?" She drops them about the kitchen as if it was nothing. The morning after the interview with Ram Das and his monkey, Sarah was in the classroom with her small pupils. Having finished giving them their lessons, she was putting the French exercise books together and thinking, as she did, of the various things royal personages in disguise were called upon to do. Alfred the Great, for instance, burning the cakes and getting his ears boxed by the wife of a neatherd. How frightened she must have been when she found out what she had done. If Miss Minchin should find out that she, Sarah, whose toes were almost sticking out of her boots, was a princess, a real one. The look in her eyes was exactly the look which Miss Minchin most disliked. She would not have it. She was quite near her and was so enraged that she actually flew at her and boxed her ears exactly as the neatherd's wife had boxed King Alfred's. It made Sarah start. She wakened from her dream at the shock, and catching her breath stood still a second. Then, not knowing what she was going to do, she broke into a little laugh. "What are you laughing at, you bold, impudent child?" Miss Minchin exclaimed. It took Sarah a few seconds to control herself sufficiently to remember that she was a princess. Her cheeks were red and smarting from the blows she had received. "I was thinking," she answered. "Beg my pardon immediately," said Miss Minchin. Sarah hesitated a second before she replied. "I will beg your pardon for laughing if it was rude," she said, "but I won't beg your pardon for thinking." "What were you thinking?" demanded Miss Minchin. "How dare you think? What were you thinking?" Jessie tittered, and she and Lavinia nudged each other in unison. All the girls looked up from their books to listen. Really, it always interested them a little when Miss Minchin attacked Sarah. Sarah always said something queer, and never seemed the least bit frightened. She was not in the least frightened now, though her boxed ears were scarlet and her eyes were as bright as stars. "I was thinking," she answered grandly and politely, "that you did not know what you were doing." "That I did not know what I was doing?" Miss Minchin fairly gasped. "Yes," said Sarah. "And I was thinking what would happen if I were a princess and you boxed my ears. What I should do to you, and I was thinking that if I were one, you would never dare to do it, whatever I said or did. And I was thinking how surprised and frightened you would be if you suddenly found out." She had the imagined future so clearly before her eyes that she spoke in a manner which had an effect upon Miss Minchin. It almost seemed for the moment to her narrow, unimaginative mind that there must be some real power hidden behind this candid daring. "What?" she exclaimed. "Found out what?" "That I really was a princess," said Sarah, "and could do anything I like." Every pair of eyes in the room widened to its full limit. Lavinia leaned forward on her seat to look. "Go to your room," cried Miss Minchin breathlessly, "this instant. Leave the schoolroom. Attend to your lessons, young ladies." Sarah made a little bow. "Excuse me for laughing if it was impolite," she said, and walked out of the room, leaving Miss Minchin struggling with her rage and the girls whispering over their books. "Did you see her? Did you see how queer she looked?" Jessie broke out. "I shouldn't be at all surprised if she did turn out to be something. Suppose she should." And so, my friends, we're going to stop here, but we're starting to get to the really good part. I know this part may not have seemed good, but it's important because Sarah has met Ram Dass and his monkey, and they've made a connection. So I promise the next chapter will start to get really magical. So hang in there. Hopefully you're asleep. And if you're not, you can queue up another episode because there's lots of episodes of this podcast for you. And truly, 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 it has been my blessing to keep you company through this one. So I wish you sweet dreams. I wish you a good rest. And I'll ask the angels to watch over you while you sleep. You are precious in this world, and I am so deeply grateful for the gift of you. Be well, my friends, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you.